Everybody, welcome to the SEJ Marketing Think Tank. This is your moderator, Lauren Baker, founder of Search Engine Journal. And with me today, I have Kelsey Jones, the executive editor of SEJ. Hey, Kels.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So today, Kelsey's going to be discussing basically how to increase the life of your content and looking outside of just the text box alone. And I think this is great material and subject matter. We've had a lot of people sign up for this webinar today, and it resonates with just about anyone. So really, like, how to think more about just blogging and what you can do from a blogging, podcast, webinar, content perspective to just take advantage of that content that you're producing as a maker and putting it out there and making sure that you're getting it out there for almost everyone to digest and continuously adding and adding and adding to it. There's an old saying in SEO that adding content to a piece doesn't necessarily make it evergreen. Getting more interaction and linking to that piece over time makes it evergreen. And you know, when we write blog posts or we put a study out there, we see that initial bump, and it usually sometimes will die off over time. Kelsey's going to discuss ways to get residual, ongoing, targeted traffic to that content that you produce. But before Kelsey starts with her amazing webinar today, I want to do a little bit of house cleaning. So again, thanks again for joining us at the SEJ Marketing Think Tank. Our hashtag is SEJ Think Tank. If you're attending and you're on Twitter, be sure to tell everybody out there that you are right now and learning some great stuff. If you want to shout out any of Kelsey's awesome points and tidbits, be sure to do so with hashtag SEJ Think Tank. During the webinar itself, we're going to be taking questions, but we're going to be addressing most of those questions after the webinar is over during our Q&A session. As questions come up and pop up in your head, please put them into the question box that's located on your GoToWebinar control panel. Then we'll be running through them afterwards and asking Kelsey for answers and also discussing that info. If you have any things or questions that are not necessarily content specific, more so the performance of the webinar, you can do so in your chat box or just use a question area as well. After the webinar is over, we're going to be asking all attendees to take a survey that helps us make our webinars better. And during Kelsey's presentation itself, look out for some of our poll questions that we'll be sending out to you during the webinar. It's great to be able to get some of that data from you, our attendee base, and then also it really helps Kelsey craft the delivery of her content today in her presentation. So that's really enough housekeeping from me. I'll turn things over to you, Kels.
Thanks. Can you see just my slides and my video okay? Lauren?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. We had a lot of attendees today, so I'm excited to get started. So just really quick, a little bit about me. I'm the executive editor at SEJ. I have about 8 years of marketing and PR experience. I've been in journalism and editing for 11 years, which has helped me a lot with what I do at SEJ and what I'm going to talk about today. At SEJ, I run our entire content strategy, and our goals are, of course, to drive traffic and increase community engagement. So we do love those live tweets. And I'm currently obsessed with Pokemon Go. So if anyone wants to live tweet me about Pokemon Go, I will gladly talk to you about it. So let's get started. So first, I want to talk about, why you should think outside the text box. Why is it important to repurpose the content that you are already writing? Well, to talk about that, let's first talk about what happens to what I'm going to call dead content. And that's content that you just write and then publish on your blog and you're done. So the process usually goes like this. You work on the content, you write it, then you assign someone to write it, and then it gets published and shared on social media. Well, that's it. The cycle then repeats over again. You move on to the next piece of content. Well, I'm going to urge you to try a different approach, kind of think outside of that. So there's lots of reasons why you should start thinking about repurposing the content you already have. First, it's going to increase your website traffic and your social media and engagement and shares. I found a study that interesting content is actually one of the top 3 reasons why users follow brands on social media. So having your content repurposed for sharing on social media is going to help drive that engagement and have users look to you as a thought leader in your space. It's also going to decrease costs and increase efficiency. So it's usually a little bit cheaper to repurpose content you already have than to start from scratch and write new content all over again. So before I delve into some of my top ways for repurposing specifically written content, I wanted to do a poll question.
Great. I'll get launching that right now. Kelsey, are you sure you don't want to just turn this thing into a Pokemon Go webinar?
I mean, there may be some Easter eggs. I don't know. But maybe we'll have to save that for next time.
Awesome. So our first poll question today is pretty simple. Do you repurpose content? Select one of the following. Yes, no, or you're planning on it. So if everyone could just take the time to fill this out real quickly, the quicker everyone fills it out, the quicker we'll get it off your screen and back to Kelsey's presentation. So we're at almost 70% now. Pretty awesome. I'll just count down, try to hit 80%. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, this is your last chance, so if you haven't voted yet, please vote now. 1. All right. That's 75%. Pretty good. Closing the poll. And then it looks like 44% of you do share or do repurpose content. 38%, a pretty good amount of planning on it. So hopefully you'll be able to get lots of great ideas from today. And then 18% do not repurpose content, but we're thinking that you're probably here because you're planning on doing so. So I'll hand things back off to you, Kels.
Thank you. All right, back to full screen, okay?
Yep.
All right, so let's get started with some of the top ways I have for repurposing written content. So I'm going to give some brand examples for each of these, just so if you're a brand, maybe it'll help spur some inspiration for you guys. So first, social media images. So when I say social media images, I basically mean, creating those images that you might see on Pinterest or you might see with the Facebook post. Maybe it has some words on the image. Maybe it has a illustrative approach to the content that you've already written. So 87% of the most shared content on Facebook are actually images or contain images. So images make your content immediately more visible, more noticeable. So it's always good to have images with your social media posts on all the platforms, of course Instagram, which is visually based, and Pinterest as well, and then Twitter and Facebook and even LinkedIn too. So some of the ideas I have that work for any industry when it comes to repurposing content for social media is to do key takeaways of long form content. So let's say you did a white paper about a study in your industry. You could create images that have statistics of key takeaways that you have gotten from the white paper. That usually works really well and gets shared really easily because it's easy to read, it's in a visual format so people notice it, and you'll get a lot more engagement that way. When I say key takeaways too, I also mean let's say I was doing an instructional post about how to install Pokemon Go, and I said one tip is to use your Google account because it's easier, even though there was that debacle with the Google permissions, but now that's fixed. But anyway, just a quick, key takeaway or quick thing that somebody could learn from your content, and then you can include the link to the content maybe in the image caption or with the update. Another good option too is if you do a lot of content where you cite experts, you could create quote images. So let's say an expert has a specific piece of advice on how to do something in your industry. You could include their photo and then their quote, and that's something that's really great for sharing, especially on Instagram and Pinterest. Besides Facebook and Twitter. So the example I have on the screen too, I wanted to be sure to give some brand examples, so how brands could be using this. This is a real example from Bounty Towels. So on their website, they have a recipe library, which I think works really well because I know most of us keep our paper towels in the kitchen. So in this recipe, they have something easy to make meatball kebabs, basically. So in this update, you can see they created visual interpretations of the recipe. So they have step 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then you'll see on step 3 in the bottom left-hand corner, they use a Bounty paper towel to clean up a mess. So that was kind of an easy, natural way to include their product in the image. And then in the text update, the text part of the update, they link to the full recipe. So this is a really good example of an easy way to repurpose the recipe content in Bounty's case, make it visual so it looks really appealing, especially food is going to look great. Certain products, things that are bright, are going to look great on images as well. So I thought that was a really cool example of a brand that is using social media image repurposing for their content that's already on their site. So let's move on to another type of visual content that I think isn't taken advantage of enough, especially for B2B industries, and that's SlideShare. So SlideShare is basically a platform where you can upload PowerPoint presentations, infographics, slides, things like that. It's owned by LinkedIn, and it currently has about 160 million monthly page views. So it's a pretty well-established site. You can find a lot of information on it. There. And one thing that I see a lot of brands doing on SlideShare that I really like is diluting their content. So if you have a long piece of content that you think you could break down into slides with key points, that's something that does really well on SlideShare. So in this example, I have a study from Dell. They did a study about mobility in the workplace, so how that's looking for workers today. And so they did a little nine-slide presentation where each slide had a takeaway from their content, and then in the description of their SlideShare presentation, they linked to the URL for the full white paper, so people could go download the full white paper. So it's kind of a way to, you know, get more visibility for your content because you're sharing it on SlideShare, and you can add tags and keywords to your SlideShare presentation so more people can find it, and then you can link to the actual full content. And that works both ways as well. So then you could embed your SlideShare presentation maybe on the landing page for your white paper, so if people aren't sure if they want to download it, they could just thumb through the SlideShare presentation, and that could entice them to give you guys their email address, so then they could download the white paper. And it's really super easy to use too. I like the platform a lot. Another really good example is, you know, repurposing the content that you have on your site in several different places. So this example I have is from SurveyMonkey. So they, Dave Goldberg, who unfortunately passed away, he used to be SurveyMonkey's CEO. So first SurveyMonkey did a study about how people use Twitter using their own platform. So SurveyMonkey obviously is a place where you can do surveys. So they did one on how people can use Twitter. Well, he went on Bloomberg Business News and did an interview about their findings. Well, then the same time that interview was going on, the SurveyMonkey blog published a blog post about their findings. And then they also published a SlideShare presentation about the key takeaways of their study, so how people can use Twitter. So this is an example of a multi-platform approach. It's all the same content, their Twitter findings from SurveyMonkey, but then they repurposed it into a video interview, a blog post, and then a SlideShare presentation. And I'm sure they did stuff on Twitter too, but just for this purpose, those were the three that I thought were really interesting. So it is possible to use your content on several different platforms. In this version, you know, you're not only getting an audience that might prefer video, but you're also doing written content, so if they want to read the findings via a blog post, and then visually with the SlideShare presentation with the key takeaways. So really cool example. Next up, another media format that I think people need to pay attention to is audio transcription. So that's basically taking your written content and turning it into an audio format. So mixing up learning mediums can actually increase attention span. That was a finding from NPR. transcribing your content also makes it more accessible to different audiences. So not only, is it good for people that maybe want to listen to a blog post while they're in their car, they're exercising, or while they're working, it's also good for people with disabilities that maybe can't read the content to be able to access a visual format of it. In this example I have on the screen, Oregon's DMV department, they do this really cool thing. So they have their Oregon driver's manual. They have an audio version of it that is in English and in Spanish. So let's say, I moved to Portland, which is an awesome city, and I needed to retake my driver's test to get my driver's license there, but I didn't have time to read the manual. I could download the audio version here from their site for free and, go through it maybe while I'm doing chores, unpacking boxes since I moved, going on a walk with my dogs, whatever, and just kind of get the gist of it so I'm prepared to take the test. So this is a really cool way of a brand that I wouldn't have really thought would use audio in a really cool way. So any content you have that you think your users could benefit from an audio version, consider it for sure. There's services that are affordable that allow you to do that. You could just have your authors that wrote the piece do it. It actually doesn't take a lot of time, and it's pretty easy to do. Another thing with audio that could be a solution as well is if you do video interviews, you could also translate them to audio, which is something we at Search Engine Journal are going to consider doing for our webinars. We're going to consider transcribing them into audio versions for our podcast, our Marketing Nerds podcast stream. So that's another cool way, is taking video and turning it into just an audio version. You could also switch it. So if you have audio from maybe an interview or, again, a webinar, you could transcribe it into a text version, which is something we do with Marketing Nerds as well, which I'm going to talk about in the next section. So a lot of things you could do with audio. Another example I don't have on the screen, but John Loomer, Jon Loomer, he is a Facebook marketing expert. I think his website is just jonloomer.com. Danielle, if you want to put it in the chat. But in most of his blog posts, he does audio versions as well. So you can download the audio version of his blog posts for free, and then, like I said, take it on the go and listen to it while you're working, exercising, driving, whatever. So another option as well. So like I touched on before, podcasts are another great way to redo and repurpose your content that you already have. So one of the reasons why I want to suggest to you guys to consider podcasts is because, we're basically the Netflix generation. So we expect things on demand. We want them now. I want to be able to binge watch the entire new season of Orange is the New Black. I don't want to wait, every week for a new episode to come out. And so that's something that plays really well into podcasts, because once I discover a new podcast, I can listen to several episodes in the same day. I don't have to wait for a new episode to come out every time. Another surprising statistic that I found when I was creating this presentation is that podcasts actually make up over a quarter of all audio listened to on all of our devices. So, your car radios, your phones, the computer, over a quarter of that, people are listening to podcasts. So I think that that is just showing the power and the popularity of podcasts and the foothold that they really have in our culture and how we're absorbing information. So like I mentioned before, you could take your webinars and turn them into audio versions, or your video interviews, turn them into audio versions and put them on your podcast. Other examples is let's say you have a really good white paper or long-form blog post that has expert opinions. You then could continue the conversation and have a expert talk more about it on your podcast. So that's taking the core idea of the written content that you already wrote and expanding upon it. Maybe there's more things you wanted to cover that would be easier to do through an audio format with podcasts. So I would consider that whenever you're creating your podcast. Just take the blog posts that have done well on your site and do a podcast about it. And then you can link to the blog post as well, and that kind of generates some more ongoing traffic to your older content. In the podcast episodes too, you could also link to other pieces of content that are related. So let's say that Marketing Nerds did a podcast about Snapchat. We could link to our other articles that we have already written about Snapchat. So it's a good way to get some good internal linking going as well. Another option is to recap the content that you've already done. So white papers, studies, blog posts, etc. An example of this is the Fodors. I'm saying that wrong probably, but they're the company that does travel guides across the world. So they have a podcast based on their guides that they publish. So they publish the written guides in printed and online form, and then they do little bite-sized snippet podcasts about it. So in this example on the screen, they have a guide about Dublin, Ireland, which I'm sure is beautiful. I want to go there someday. But they do a little bitty podcast that's about 5 minutes long about a specific attraction in Dublin, which is the National Wax Museum, which is actually apparently a really cool attraction in Dublin. So they talked to one of the employees from the Wax Museum as part of their podcast, and it just rolls into their Dublin guide that they publish. So that's a really cool way to, further promote the content that you've already created and get more people involved that are related to the content and get them involved into what you're doing. So of course it's probably natural to then talk about video as another way to repurpose content. So I know video's been around for a while. A lot of you guys probably know that you need to have video, but you haven't gotten around to it. So I have a few ideas that I thought would be useful. So a statistics I thought was super interesting is that over 78% of all U.S. internet users watch video daily. So that's almost 196 million viewers are regularly watching videos online. It's even grown a lot on mobile as well. People a lot of times will prefer to watch video on their phones versus reading and having to scroll through lots of content. So there's two ways you can do video. First, you can repurpose from your video content. So taking video interviews and turning them into blog posts either through transcription or just writing summaries. We do the summary route a lot with our podcasts, or not podcasts, our PubCon interviews that we do every year at PubCon. On-demand audio versions, like I said before, turning those into just an audio download or a podcast. One thing that BuzzFeed does a lot is they'll make GIFs from their videos. So let's say they do a video about a breaking news topic, they'll then create GIFs from that and publish it in their post about the video. So if you have, something funny that happened in the video, interesting insight, you could overlay what the person's saying on the GIF and then turn it into, images that people could share. And then finally, you can do breaking industry news, which is what the example is that I'm sharing here. So Newegg has about 408,000 subscribers on their YouTube channel. Newegg sells like computers and tech stuff for your computer. Like if you wanted to build a computer, you could buy a hard drive and a monitor and keyboard and everything. So one thing they do is whenever there's breaking news in the tech industry or tech gadgets, they do a video about it first with expert bloggers, and then they turn that into a written blog post. So a lot of times it's easier if you already have a studio set up to do a video really fast to get it out there so you break the news and then turn it into written content afterwards. So that's something Newegg is doing. Another thing you could do is to go the opposite way, so take your written content and turn it into video. So you could do discussions of long-form posts. So let's say you had a long-form post come out that was controversial or new for your industry. Maybe you could have 2 employees discuss it in a video format. You could explain key topics. So if you have something that's super technical or super complicated, walking through it on a video usually helps people understand a lot easier. And then finally, you could take your long-form content and turn it into a presentation. So let's say I did an entire ebook about Pokemon Go or whatever, Snapchat or whatever. I could then turn it into a presentation format with slides with key takeaways and record myself giving it just like I would at a conference and record that on video. That's another great way to get your message out there just in another format, and then publishing it on YouTube is going to also help you grow your audience because people might be searching on YouTube for specific keywords that maybe they wouldn't have found your website with the long form content on otherwise. So the example I have for this is Walmart. They actually have over 86,000 YouTube subscribers. They probably have more now since I created this presentation, but they have a content library with a lot of how-tos, and so it works for them because you can get a ton of stuff at Walmart. I mean, almost anything you want. So they take the Walmart products and why people would be going to Walmart. So in this instance, you know, maybe I'm going to get some trimmers because I need to trim my shrubs. Well, they take their step-by-step tutorials that are on their website and turn it into a video explainer as well. So this started out as a written article on how to prune trees and shrubs, which was on Walmart's site. They then recorded someone actually doing it and published that on their YouTube channel. And so that's a really cool way to take maybe an explainer article or walk people through something that might be complicated and do it in video format, either in live person like Walmart's doing, or maybe if you could show them on the screen and do a screen share that you record with, you know, you're walking through it visually or audio. God, I can't talk today. Audio as a speaker, and they see your screen to explain the content. It can really help people understand it better, get a better grasp, maybe want to learn more from you. So then finally, I wanted to touch on syndication. So in this case, syndication means taking your content that you already written for your blog and getting it published on other platforms. So for instance, we syndicate some articles on Search Engine Journal. So we syndicate from Buffer, for instance. So we'll take 2 blog posts from the Buffer blog every month and republish it on our site and then link back to Buffer's blog, and that gives them some traffic and some visibility for their content because they're reaching our audience as well as their own with one piece of content. So I was surprised to find this stat. Content syndication can actually bring up to 180% more email subscribers, as well as increased traffic and social engagement, just because, again, you're reaching another platform, another publisher's audience that maybe you wouldn't have gotten as otherwise. So in addition to, you know, having your content republished on other industry blogs, you can also do it on other platforms that you create yourself, like Medium, or in the example I'm going to talk about, Tumblr. So in this example, J.Crew does this for their blog. So they write a blog post. In this case, it was about different types of denim for their collection for that season. So they did a full blog post on their regular blog, and then they did more of a visual version of it for Tumblr. So it's a really cool example of syndicating your content onto another platform and just kind of making it a little bit different. If you want to go the full republication route, like we do with the Buffer content, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll change the title, and then we might update some of the content in the post itself if it's outdated or the links are broken, things like that. So you do want a little bit of difference in between each of the pieces of content you syndicate, and you want to make sure you have the rel canonical tag set up for the piece of content that's syndicated, so the duplicate content, so it doesn't mess with getting flagged for duplicate content in the search engines. So with that being said, Lauren, we have our second poll.
Sure. And one thing I'd like to add with that's a bonus with syndication is that if you have your blog post published on a third-party site and you canonical it back to yourself, you typically absorb the social signals and inbound link equity from that as well. So it's a good way to link build too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, next poll. So if you do repurpose content, what is your favorite way to do so? Select one of the following: social media images, webinars or podcasts, audio, and video. So it looks like we've had about 40% of you vote already. And the percent number thing is increasing really highly while I'm looking at it, which is cool. So I'll just do a quick countdown. We're at 60% right now. I'd like to beat the last poll, which came in at 75%. So do a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2. Oh, final chance. 1. Okay, I'm going to hit the close poll button. All right, 67% voted. And the results are an overwhelming amount of you repurpose content via social media images, which is really cool because images in social media lead to more interaction and clicking, especially if it's your featured image on your post that you share through social channels. Webinars or podcasts at 11% and audio and video at 8%. So
Awesome.
Back to you, Kelsey.
Thank you. Okay, let's relaunch that. All right.
By the way, that's an awesome wallpaper. Yeah.
Oh, it's Mad Max, I think. Yeah. Awesome movie if you guys haven't seen it. So
the slide, the PowerPoint presentation is a little off right now. It's like half the screen with a drop box.
Really? That's
weird. Try that again.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All systems go.
Okay, so moving on, we have the ways that I just went through that you can repurpose content. And I want to move on and talk about an actual example of a piece of content that could be repurposed in the ways I mentioned. So kind of tying it back in why you should think outside the text box and repurpose the content. So like I said, let's use a real example. So Nike has a really cool blog. If you guys haven't checked it out, I would recommend. They do really cool content that I wouldn't have thought of, you know, that really hits their target audience. So in this example, they did a whole photo shoot with some of the championship runners of Kenya. So Kenya is a really well-known country to have amazing runners that become sponsored marathoners and Olympians. And so they did a photo shoot with some of the top runners. So of course they put the runners in Nike clothing and then they shot them with the amazing background of Kenya, which looks beautiful. So they did interviews in the original blog post. So the Kenyan runners were talking about why they run, their histories, training, stuff like that. So let's use some of our suggestions that we just went over. So we could do social media images and a SlideShare presentation with running tips from the runners. So we have this gentleman right here. This could be overlaid with a quote from him on some of his favorite running tips or how he maybe beats the temperatures in Kenya because I'm sure it gets super hot. Things that would be useful to Nike's target audience. So Nike is targeting runners in this instance with this feature. So maybe some tips on staying hydrated, how he ups his mileage, what he recovers, what his recovery schedule is after a big race. And you could do images, social media images that Nike then shares across their social media platforms and then turn those images into a SlideShare presentation. So you're taking, you know, one piece of content, turning it into images, and then turning it into a SlideShare presentation, all with really great stuff that's going to help Nike's target audience of runners that are training or passionate about running. Some really useful tips from someone who is at the top of the field. So moving on, you know, Nike could have done audio and video interviews with the runners. So they talked to them when they did the feature, and while they were there, they could have done interviews with them just to get more content and more insight from them. That's just going to be building more content based on what you're already doing. So it's not that much more work. You're already in Kenya. You're already connected with the runners to get more information from them with a podcast or a video interview. That's something we do a lot with SCJ Summit, which is our marketing series. Our last one is in New York City, November 2nd, by the way, if anyone's interested in attending. So what we do is we have our speakers give video interviews. They're already there at SCJ Summit. You know, they're already speaking, so we usually the MC or someone else who's helping, like Bren or Lauren, will do a video interview with them. And so that's already taking their content, but then it's also going to allow us to reach our YouTube subscribers. We also do podcasts with our speakers as well if they're interested. So we will do a podcast for them before the actual conference, and then that's another way for us to promote SCJ Summit. So going back to the Nike example, I kind of went off track a little bit because I got excited about SCJ Summit. But another thing we could do is, as far as syndication, you could give exclusive video on content that you've already shot with the runners, or maybe more photos since you did a photo shoot, to maybe your blogger network. If you have influencers that you work with, you could give them exclusive pieces of content in the feature that maybe aren't published anywhere else and give it to them to publish. Maybe you could give it to them to publish first, and then you end up republishing it on your own platform. So think about how you could leverage the influencers that you're already working with and have them leverage your content to get it out there to more people. So to wrap it all up, I wanted to give 3 takeaways when it comes to repurposing content and thinking outside the text box. So you want to convert written content into different formats, or vice versa. Pick your formats and convert it into written. That's going to help you extend the life of your content. Publishing in different formats like audio and video can increase user attention span and interest. It also makes it more convenient for people who want to absorb your content but don't have time to read it all. And then also consider on-demand audio and partnering with other publishers or influencers in your space to make your content go further by going to other channels and audiences. And that's all for me. If you guys have any questions, I know we're going to do the Q&A after this, but I can also be reached at these channels. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelsey. And just to let everyone know, our next upcoming SCJ Think Tank webinar is going to be on July 27th with the team from Marin Software. Yeah, we have a lot of questions that came in that we can address now in Q&A. And let's get started. So Dylan asks, when writing a piece of content, do you recommend simultaneously creating content for other repurposing formats? For example, social media recap text or podcast script, whatever it may be. So the message best meets the medium, or should you consider making these changes when you're actually going through the repurposing process?
I think, oh,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's definitely easier to do it as part of the process. So that's what we try to do at SCJ, because it's just easier while you're in the process to do it. So I would say, you know, make it a part of your process as you're creating new content. But if this is something that you're just starting to do, in addition to making it part of your process, I would also recommend that you go back to your older, highest performing pieces of content and think about how you can repurpose them. So don't start, you know, from right now, you know, going forward, all new content you'll repurpose. Think about in the past what you've done in the past and what your top performing articles or pieces of content are, and how you could repurpose those, maybe through updating them if they're outdated to today, or doing the other formats like I mentioned.
Yeah, I agree. Do this on both fronts. So like, you know, look at if you find an old like listicle or a written checklist that's done extremely well with getting links and traffic to your site over time, and you want to, first of all, update that. But secondly, there's ways that you can take that listicle and turn it into, you know, a PDF or a printable checklist image where, say, it's a moving and packing checklist, right? That's brought to you by a real estate company. So putting that out there, making it cute, maybe putting some flowers on it or some little Pokemon animals, and then putting it on Pinterest can then lead to lots of different pins and traffic to your site with a piece of content that you've already written and put together. You know, one thing we worked on also was like, if you're going to do a PDF checklist, why not make it interactive so you can actually check off the check boxes on the PDF type thing in Adobe. Little things like that. So ways that you can definitely repurpose the content. Now, keeping the medium in mind with the message, and I always misquote Marshall McLuhan, but that's what it reminds me of. Your question, Dylan, is also like one thing I really like to do, and a lot of this comes back to infographics. So if I'm working on an infographic project, I always keep in mind the ability to splice it up and utilize it for Facebook images, utilize sections of the infographic for Pinterest, utilize sections of the infographic to splice and put into a SlideShare presentation. And really, if you can keep all of that in mind during the original creative process and talk to your designer and be like, hey, just put this into like nice little boxes so we can just basically cut it and place it in all these different locations. It's a really great way to make sure that you're using your best design efficiency or content efficiency when doing that, because the last thing you want to do is put together a really great creative piece of content and then after the fact decide to start marketing it in other channels and then going back to your designer who's probably going to give you another quote to cut that up or change it around or things like that. So just keeping that in mind during the design process really helps across the board. And typically the message is, the message is the same. It's just more of a question of, having those, making sure that that image can work as a Twitter card or an image that you can take from that piece can work as a featured image within Facebook. Or maybe you can take one piece of data and turn that into like a meme style image. So like really planning and storyboarding all of that out during that initial content creation process is great with making sure that you're not spending extra revenue in the future to repurpose that content.
Agreed.
Cool. Next question. From Rachel, what's the best way to repurpose a blog into a podcast?
So I think the approach probably depends on your industry and the topic. So if it's something that's super advanced that you think deserves more conversation, like that's especially the case with emerging technology. So since I'm in marketing, I'm going to use a marketing example. Let's say Facebook Live is still pretty new. If I did a guide about Facebook Live, but there were still like little nuances that I think would be better explained over audio, I think that works really well for a podcast version. So let's say, I did a whole guide about Facebook Live, but people were still asking me, okay, but how can I get audience members or how can I get people to watch? Maybe then I could do a whole podcast about how to grow your audience for Facebook Live. So take a little nuance of a piece of content you have and expand upon it. I think that works really well for podcasts because a lot of time podcasts are a conversation, between two people. So talking about the topic and delving in a little bit deeper than what you covered on your content usually works really well.
Yeah. I typically take the opposite approach. And you guys know I've done this in the past where first of all, we all type a lot, right? Your thumbs are sore at the end of the day from typing on your phone. Your fingers are sore from typing on your keyboard, especially if you have like an old Microsoft Dell keyboard or something like that. So sometimes when I like to write, what I'll do is I'll record myself almost either doing a podcast or talking about a subject and then transcribe it from there. Almost an opposite approach because sometimes I feel like I might say something that's halfway resourceful during our conversation right now, but I'll forget it 5 minutes later because I'm going to go make a sandwich or jump on a phone call or something like that, and I'll just totally forget about it. So luckily we're recording this, and this is going to be probably transcribed at one point in time, and that nugget of resourceful information will be documented forever somewhere, right? And then maybe it'll turn into a quote or whatever it may be. So point being is that I really like to take the opposite approach sometimes and do an audio recording first and then turn it into a blog post from there.
Yeah, and that's what we do with Marketing Nerds. When our new episodes come out every Friday, we use a transcription service. We use rev.com, rev.com, which they don't sponsor us or anything. We just like using them. They'll take our audio podcast episode and turn it into a transcribed version. And so then Aki, who's one of our editors, will turn it into a blog post, and that's what goes out Fridays. So you're right. I mean, that's definitely another way to get more content out there. And of course, you know, you speak way faster than you type, no matter how good of a typist you are. So a lot of times I'll do that to create blog posts. In Google Docs now, you can, I think it's in the Tools menu, you can bring up a microphone and it'll automatically dictate what you're saying, and it's a free tool.
Yeah.
Dragon dictation or whatever, Nuance Dragon or whatever, was something I used forever for audio, for, you know, dictation to text, which is still a good program, but Google Docs does it for free. And I think Evernote might do it for free too. So that's another, when you talk about flipping it and doing the opposite, those are two good resources as well. But with those, you're not recording your audio. It's just transcribing it.
Oh, that's a really good point. So you don't necessarily have an audio file.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Google has that somewhere. Also, next question from Katie. What's the best way to approach potential syndication partners about sharing your own content? Any tips there, Kel? So we talked about what we share from third parties, such as Buffer on SEJ, but if we're SEJ and we're looking to get our content hosted somewhere else in the syndication partnership, how do we usually go about that?
So, you know, since I'm executive editor of Search Engine Journal, I get pitched a lot to have people's content syndicate on SEJ. Things that I like are personal touches. So maybe you mention an article that we wrote that relates to an article that's on your site to kind of show that you're paying attention and proving that, you know, our audiences may cross over and have the same people. Another thing I would share are if you have any interesting stats about your content. So if you're getting good traffic on your content already or good social engagement, it's always good to share, like maybe an example. So saying, you know, for instance, our last, you know, piece of content about XYZ got, you know, 500 social shares and this many reads, to kind of show that people are listening or not listening, reading and sharing your content. That's always good. Any way you can make it personal as possible, I would, because if you're trying to pitch to a publisher like Search Engine Journal or, you know, the equivalent of Search Engine Journal in your industry, they probably get pitches all the time, and you can tell when something's templated or not really thought out. Either they'll spell your name wrong or they'll say "Dear Sir" when Search Engine Journal is majority women, which is super annoying and frankly kind of rude. Just taking the time to find an actual name of the person who makes the decision, pointing out, like I said, an actual piece of content they recently published that relates to a piece of content you published, and then make their job as easy as possible. Offer to automatically send them 2 pieces of content that they can syndicate every month, and then just set a reoccurring reminder on your calendar, or, you know, if you have a to-do app like I use Todoist all the time, to send them that content. That'll only take you 5 minutes, but it's making their job a lot easier. Basically, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes. So think ahead of all the objections they might have and already answer that in your pitch email. So then they don't really have a reason to say no. And don't take it personal if they do say no. I mean, it might take you a few times, just depending on what you're pitching for someone to say yes.
And also, a couple of good places to get started with syndicating your content would be LinkedIn. So on your LinkedIn account, you can post. And also, if you're writing about anything in the social media world, what is it, Social Media Today? They syndicate a lot of content, right? So, and there's others out there. There's Medium, right? So like most of them, at least with LinkedIn, when you're putting your content on there, I do believe that they have a field with the URL for the original location of that content. So that way you're getting attribution back to your site, back to your brand if someone happens to stumble upon it. And there's a couple of questions that came in basically about canonical tags and content syndication. And that really goes back to that. So, and I think Medium might even give you the same option to list the source of your content, and anyone can contribute to Medium. So if you get an email from someone saying that they'll get an article on Medium for like $100 for you, don't do that, because you can just go to Medium and sign up with your Twitter account and post. But the way that the canonical tag works is, you know, say you're the source, right? So let's just use SEJ as an example. SEJ has a post about Pokemon Go that we contribute to. Let's say we take that post and we syndicate it or broadcast it on a site like Social Media Today. So on Social Media Today, they would use a canonical tag that says, you know, canonical equals searchengine.com/Pokemon Go. That way Google knows that they haven't stolen that content and that we're the owner of that content, which means that you're not going to run into duplicate content style issues out there. And Google's not even going to index that piece on Social Media Today. You may ask yourself, well, what's the value if Google's not going to index it? Well, we all know that every publisher out there has Facebook pages, email newsletters, everything else in their own audience. So basically, by them syndicating your content, they're introducing you and your brand to their audience. Also, the canonical tag with a cross-domain canonical from one site to the next, it will transfer over social share numbers. There's some discussion around this, but whether or not link equity gets transferred over is also something that's out there too. So if someone links to Social Media Today, you should be able to, we at SEJ will absorb that link juice, so to speak, almost in the same way the 301 redirect would work. So it's a really good platform and a really good way to syndicate your content. And if you think about it, content syndication is nothing new. Newspapers have been doing it forever. Book companies have been doing it forever. It's just something where, you know, think of like George Will, like a newspaper columnist. His one piece on his site gets broadcast to thousands of other sites. But it's set up as the author being George Will, probably canonicals back to wherever he's the columnist at. Therefore, Google knows that that person is the source of the content. There was a question about whether or not you can do that after the fact, and the answer is yes. So if you've been syndicating content out there to various other sites, and you'd like to set up canonicals, you can contact those site owners and ask for that. And basically, if you think about this, going back in our SEO time machine to 2010, 2011, when Panda rolled out, a big component of the Panda update was to cut back on the article directory marketplace, where you would publish one article and get it syndicated to thousands of other article sites. And canonicals rolled out around the same time, so it's just basically making sure that you're not putting as much content out there as possible and letting Google know who the owner is.
Yeah. Another good site to get syndication on is business to community. So it's business, the number 2, community.com. They're kind of like Social Media Today, and you just put in your RSS feed and to apply, and then they'll automatically pick and choose content to republish. As far as Medium, they just released a new feature where you can just input a URL of one of your old blog posts, and it will automatically import it to the Medium platform. So it'll bring in the content, the title, and then your images, and then at the end it says this content is from, you know, and gives the link. I would assume that that's a rel canonical link that they add in, or a tag, you know, in the header. I haven't checked, but I just noticed that they started doing that. Before, you'd have to do it manually, like open up a new Medium post and then just copy and paste manually. So this is, with the URL and the auto import, it's something they just started doing. that makes it super easy to republish on Medium. So
that's pretty cool. That's pretty
yeah.
cool. So we've had a lot of questions about is there a guide for best practices on syndication? How do I do this with syndication and canonicals? Maybe in an effort to top your current record of webinar registrants, Kelsey, I can do a piece on syndication and canonicals for everyone, and then follow up on that, or a piece on the blog. But we'll send out some different guides and blog posts on the topic matter that we have already to you all to help answer those questions and help you do some research on the subject matter. Last question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I'll try to look too for some after the webinar, and I'll give them on our hashtag SEJ Think Tank. So if you're interested, we can keep talking about it there, and I'll find some more resources to share there as well.
Great. Final question, which comes from Katie, is that if you have a limited budget and resources, what would be your top suggestion for content creation? Written, podcast, images, what would you recommend?
I'd say images are the easiest, because of course you want a designer, but if you don't have one, you could use a tool like Canva or PicMonkey and create some pretty good images. And there's a lot of good free resources about design just to learn the basics. Again, you're not going to replace a professional designer, but I would say that that's probably the easiest thing to do with the most limited budget. Recording things on audio is pretty easy too. So, you know, I have a Mac, and QuickTime you can record audio from there and video as well. So that'd be something if you're a smaller brand to just use the software you already have, like QuickTime, or I'm sure there's free stuff out there for Windows, and just do videos and audio and get them up on YouTube, or do a podcast. It doesn't take a lot of money and resources to do a podcast or to do videos. Usually the most amount of money is based on editing. So if you can cut down on that or find someone affordable, I mean, it could be worth the time as well. But if I had to choose, probably social media.
Yeah, I agree. And Canva is a great tool. Like, I'm a terrible graphic designer, and if it wasn't for Canva, I'd just still be using MS Paint to make headers for some of my own projects or something like that. But with Canva, I was just amazed at how easy it is to set something up. And I had syndicated a piece on LinkedIn, and I used Canva. And this is not like an ad for my man Guy Kawasaki's Canva project or whatever, but it's just a really, really great tool to be able to put together professional looking header graphics or whatever it may be. And when I did that, it got a ton of shares and traffic, and I really attribute like putting together an original graphic to that. So definitely check it out.
For sure. Agreed.
All right, great. So we're at the 10:58 mark PST. So thanks so much, Kelsey. Great presentation. Just to let everyone know that we're going to be sending out the video of Kelsey's presentation to all registrants for today's SEJ Think Tank webinar, and it will also be available on our site recap on SEJ, along with on our YouTube channel. And you'll possibly be hearing this in the future as a Marketing Nerds podcast, since we'll be, how meta can you get, repurposing the content from our content repurposing presentation. And again, our next webinar, SEJ Think Tank webinar, is going to be on the Search Marketer's Guide to Turning Online Browsing into Online Buying, so very conversion oriented, presented by Marin Software. It's going to be on July 27th, same bat time, same bat channel. So thanks again, Kelsey, and just to let everyone know, right after we're finished with this webinar, we're going to be sending out a short survey right through the GoToWebinar platform. So please take the time, just a couple seconds to fill that out. It really helps us with our planning and everything else. So thanks again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.